Welcome back. A little personnel news out of the Trump transition. Monica Crowley, who for a long time has been a Fox News personality, was about to join the National Security Council at the Trump White House. CNN's K-File doing some extensive reporting about plagiarism by Monica Crowley, including in a 2012 book she wrote. The Trump transition initially defended her, but we are now getting word she will not be joining the Trump staff at the White House, will not be joining the National Security Council staff as a key spokeswoman. It's a staff job, but in terms of getting pushback, getting somebody out, is it significant?
I think it's a scalp for the Democrats or for opponents of Trump to show that you can dig things up on somebody and it actually does matter. You know, it has seemed, I think, for a lot of opponents of Trump that it doesn't matter what they throw at him because they just ignore it and they issue very defiant statements like the one they initially issued in defense of Monica Crowley. But it turns out that if there's enough of an accumulation of stuff, I mean, it happened also for Jason Miller of the Trump team, that there are some things you cannot survive in Trump world. And from the outside, it can seem somewhat arbitrary.
We have some tenacious diggers at CNN, including at the K-File, so kudos to them for finding this. But shouldn't a personnel shop that's bringing people into the administration of a president of the United States be able to do this work too?
Sure, no doubt about it. But they are bringing in a ton of people here. So I think to their defense, I mean, she is someone who's a known quantity. She's on television. She talks a lot. So I think that, you know, this is one example. My guess is what she told people inside the organization probably ended up not being accurate because her first statement was that she didn't plagiarize anything. Well, then, you know, countless examples from other news organizations as well have come in since then. So I think it's probably a good sign that the transition is willing to, you know, follow some protocol and
deal with the problem.
Clean house, right?
Deal with the problem. All right, let's move on to this one. The rest of the world now getting a taste of what we have been through the past year plus here in the United States. This question: what to make or how much to make of the outlandish and sometimes offensive things that Donald Trump says? Angela Merkel is the Chancellor of Germany, a critical U.S. ally on economic and security issues. Vladimir Putin, you all know, is the president of Russia. He bullies his neighbors and provides the warplanes killing civilians in Syria. Asked who he trusts more, Merkel or Putin? Here's Trump's answer to European journalists.
Well, I start off trusting both. But let's see how long that lasts. It may not last long at all.
I start off trusting both. To make, I know he says we'll see how long it lasts, but to even for a half a sentence essentially equate Angela Merkel and Vladimir Putin is a slap in the face and an insult to a critical U.S. ally and a key figure in the Western alliance. He goes on in the same interview to say again, as he did during the campaign, he thinks NATO is obsolete. He contradicts himself a bit and says, but there are parts of it that are good. But as we talk about the tone in Washington, the uncertainty in Washington, the town on edge, what about the world?
Well, let's go back and remember what Trump has said about Angela Merkel throughout the campaign. He has been very critical of Germany's refugee policy, and he continuously. And then Hillary Clinton said that Angela Merkel was her favorite European or her favorite world leader. So there is a little bit of history there. I'm not saying it's excuse, but that's kind of where he's coming from. This is not someone that he's revered in the past, and he's definitely had nicer things to say about.
Hang on just one second, because to Jackie's point about the refugee crisis, and we should have noted, this is an interview with the Times of London and Bild, a German magazine. Listen to Donald Trump talking about Merkel and her decision to let Syrian refugees into Germany.
I had great respect for her. I felt she was a great, great leader. I think she made one very catastrophic mistake, and that was taking all of these illegals and taking all of the people from wherever they come from, and nobody really knows where they come from.
Well, it's striking to me, and it could be a slip of the tongue, but they're refugees. He uses the term illegals as if as if we're having the immigration debate here in the United States. A sovereign nation decided, and they've paid some price for it, it's caused quite a bit of political controversy, to let them in. It was a humanitarian thing on her part, but to call them illegals, I think, just tells me something about his mindset.
Well, throughout the campaign, Trump equated the refugee issue with the immigration issue, basically saying these are all scary foreigners that we're not doing enough to tell where they come from or to keep enough of them out. And I think his worldview also has been very consistent in this sort of populist nationalism that he espouses, which he sees as of a piece with the Brexit movement in the UK and of a piece with a lot of the nationalist movements across Europe that oppose, the centralization of power in the EU, that oppose alliances like NATO as taking away countries' national sovereignty. So how that plays out, I think, to your point, the world is at least as on on edge, if not more so, as Washington, D.C., about how this will translate into policy for Trump, because he has gone so far from the norms in terms of diplomacy and in terms of the things you are and are not allowed to say, the people you are and are not allowed to call up on the phone. And so do they decide, okay, this is just the way he is and we're going to disregard it? Or do all of these things have consequences because that's how diplomacy is
And I mean,
conducted?
already also warning of a tariff on German car manufacturers, 35% tariff. This is part of his putting tariffs on companies that ship jobs overseas. This time saying that for German cars, selling them back into the U.S., if they're making their cars in Mexico, they're going to get hit with a 35% tariff. I mean, this is causing a lot of tension with some of America's key allies.
Key allies. It's also causing a lot of Mexico is one of our key allies. It's causing a lot of tension in Mexico too. The Chinese are mad more about the Taiwan language and the one China policy, but also about trade. Angela Merkel saying she would not respond to Donald Trump, saying as it's only polite to wait until he's actually president, which I think is the response actually. But to your point earlier, is this, the diplomats are horrified. This is not the way you're supposed to do business. You're not supposed to have your national security advisor calling the Russian ambassador. You're supposed to wait one president at a time. You're supposed to be nice to our friends and tough on our foes. But is this part of the Trump MO? That he stirs everything up, makes everybody nervous because he thinks eventually that means they're going to come his way because they're afraid of him going way out there, that they'll give him half of what he wants or part of what he wants.
I think without question, but we're also entering a totally new moment here. We can say, oh, this is how we did it in the campaign. This, starting Friday at high noon, this is a very different moment here where everything has changed. It's a clean slate. So I was talking to a couple George W. Bush Republicans who worked in his administration, horrified by those comments of Angela Merkel, because as we know, President Bush had a very strong relationship with her, as has President Obama.
Michael Gerson, a Bush speechwriter, writing in the Washington Post today, it's back to narcissism, his fight with John Lewis and others.